Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's session on cybersecurity and preparedness for U.S. firms. I'm Melissa Grosso. I'm the director of the U.S. Department of Commerce's Middletown, Connecticut office. And I'd like to first extend a warm thank you to the Connecticut District Export Council, to our friends at CohnReznick, Robinson & Cole, and UIC Inc. for their partnership in this program. And with this program, we're wrapping up a series of webinars that we've run for Manufacturing Month. And I'm really pleased to bring you today's program. The topic of cybersecurity certainly is very germane given the current business climate. And what we wanted to do today was really provide commentary from several different perspectives, from the legal perspective, technical perspective, and a risk management insurance perspective. We've got a really great panel of experts to talk on today's cybersecurity session, so I think you'll all find this exceptionally useful and you'll walk away with a lot of pearls of wisdom. So for today's program, our moderator is Jeff Rossi, and Jeff is the office managing partner for CohnReznick's Hartford and Stamford, Connecticut offices. He serves as the co-lead of the firm's manufacturing and distribution industry practice. So for CohnReznick, we have Bhavesh Vadani, who's a principal and the national leader of the cybersecurity, technology risk, and privacy practice. Bhavesh has over 20 years of experience in the field of information risk management, security consulting, and privacy advisory services. And in his current role, he helps organizations adopt industry best practices and frameworks to improve efficiencies in day-to-day processes. And he also identifies IT governance initiatives that help corporations and organizations enhance their existing IT environment. Also joining us today from Robinson & Cole is Lynn Friedman, and Lynn practices in the data privacy and security law, cybersecurity, and complex litigation. She provides guidance on data privacy and cybersecurity compliance to a full range of public and private clients across all industries. Lynn is a member of the firm's business litigation group and chairs its data privacy and cybersecurity team. And she's also a member of the financial services cyber compliance team. And finally, today we have Boris Kovich, who is the Director of Business Development for the joint venture between CohnReznick and UIC Inc. And he's also the co-lead of the cybersecurity risk and insurance practice for UIC clients. Boris's experience includes transactional advisory with a focus on operational, contractual, and strategic risk management elements, with particular specializations in life sciences, manufacturing, real estate, retail, and tech industries. And before I turn it over to Jeff, I'll just mention one quick housekeeping item. For any questions that folks have who are attending, you can enter them in the Q&A box, which should be showing up at the bottom right portion of your screen. So with that, I will thank our panelists and turn it over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Melissa. First, we'll want to extend a heartfelt thank you to you and your entire team at Commerce for all the great programming and content that you provide, and for supporting the manufacturers the way you do. So with this esteemed panel, we'll get right into it. One of the things I usually say to kick these off is a little bit of humor. In this case, it may not be so funny, but there's there's two types of companies in the world: those that are hacked and those that are going to be hacked. So this is real and it's real serious. But we've got a great panel, and hopefully you'll learn a lot today. So we'll start off by talking about the cybersecurity atmosphere. And I'll lead off with a question for you, Bhavesh. Cybersecurity attacks are in the headlines weekly, if not daily. What are the most common attack vectors that companies generally encounter?
Yeah, Jeff, great question. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity, Melissa, again, to be on the panel. Common attacks these days, Jeff, as you can see, I mean, everybody's pretty much in tune with the ransomware attacks that organizations face. But along with ransomware, phishing attacks are increasing, are the most common vector out there in terms of attacks that are organizations are encountering. Along with that, there are two other ones that we are seeing increasingly in the marketplace, where organizations are seeing malicious malware in their environment that is stealing information or data leakage, so to speak. And most lately, we've been seeing some crypto mining, unauthorized crypto mining activities going on, wherein organizations are seeing their resources being used for mining of cryptocurrencies, which is unauthorized in many cases. So those are the trends that we're seeing in the marketplace. And I'm sure Lynn and Boris, from their perspective, are seeing some interesting trends as well, but that's what we are seeing right now. from a technical side.
Lynn, anything from your side? I know you have a big national practice and have a lot of very large organizations in your portfolio. What's common that you're seeing out there?
Right now, ransomware is the #1 thing I'm seeing, unfortunately, and it's double extortion attacks. So, following up on what Bhavesh said, they're getting in through phishing still, even though everyone thinks they can identify a phishing email. We still have a lot of incidents that are caused by phishing. We're seeing some zero-day vulnerabilities where sophisticated hackers are getting in through software vulnerabilities, remote desktop protocol, and we're still seeing quite a bit of insider threat, which basically means that either your employee does something dumb, basically, or they do something malicious and they're stealing your data. So that's really what we're seeing in the industry right now.
The increased number of attacks are causing a lot of chaos. What's the best way to recover from an attack, and what's the average cost of recovery from these attacks? And because we've got the cost section involved here, let's kick that off with Boris.
Appreciate it. And just as everybody said, thank you so much for having us, and thanks very much to all of the attendees and listeners that are here. The cost of attacks is kind of a floating number, and it really comes down to what kind of attack it is. Traditionally, in the insurance statistical world, about every compromised record comes out to about $150. Depending on what that type of record is, the cost for remediation and all the additional types of costs involved with it would turn out to be about $150. 100 to 200 is really kind of the range there. And as we're getting more in tune with cyber attacks and it's becoming much more prevalent and in our faces, we've become more efficient at it. That number has actually come down from the last several years. On the flip side of that, the number of attacks have increased, and the sophistication of attackers and hackers have certainly grown. And what that means is that once they get through your firewalls and that breach actually does happen, they're able to compromise more records than they have in the past. So while the cost may have come down, the actual exposure has increased. So it really depends on how many records a company has, whether it's small, middle, large, and then what type of records are actually compromised.
Yeah, and also just to add to that, right? One of the things that we're also seeing from a trend perspective, to Boris's point, the cost of record may have gone down. The number of threat actors, threat vectors, and the attacks have increased, not just in the enterprise or the environment that that company is. It's the extended enterprise. It's the third party. It's your supply chain. And if you start adding the impact of those attacks, that adds up very quickly, right? And then to the cost of recovery keeps piling up on that, because you're now a connected enterprise. You know, you have different connections, egress and ingress points into your environment that now you have to cover for, and you have to make sure that you have adequate protocols in place there. And the recovery has to extend to all of those different connection points that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that's connected. I mean, even a small or medium-sized business, you have 10,000 records that get compromised in a breach. You're looking at 1.5 million on average cost to remediate that. Most insurance policies for smaller businesses, they only provide $1 million limits, and that's not even taking into account what sublimits may decrease that coverage even more. So there certainly has been an increase in the risk assessment of it just because of how connected our data is.
And anything on that to add?
Just that everything that was said is absolutely correct. On top of that, you may have class action litigation, you may have enforcement actions by state AGs, or if you're a healthcare entity, the Office for Civil Rights. There's a lot of fingers in this pot from an enforcement perspective. There's lots of laws around this area. So not only the rip and replace, the recovery, that you might be getting sued by customers, you might have to sue your vendor. There's just a lot of there's a lot of arms on that spider.
Yeah, very well said. So in light of this meteoric rise of claims, and then what are the basic security protocols that insurers are looking for companies to have before even deciding to provide coverage?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and first and foremost, if folks are attending this webinar, I mean, you're certainly, if not just interested in the aspects of cybersecurity and how to protect your company, but also in all likelihood purchasing cyber insurance, or looking to purchase cyber insurance if you're new to it. Typically, in the past, there will be a basic intrusion test that you wouldn't even have to be aware of. An insurer would run on your website and your systems, and they would put out a quote. It's that simple. You could choose to buy it depending on what the premium level was, or you choose not to buy it, or haggle and negotiate what the different insuring clauses are and whether you would opt for in or out of them. Nowadays, specifically in the last 4 to 5 months, given all of the malware attacks that we've been seeing in the news, given all of the news surrounding regulatory bodies and how they've become more strict, as Lynn has just mentioned, they have definitely buckled down and increased their requirements before they even bother putting out a quote. The 3 basic items that they look for now, which they haven't in the past, really revolve around the encryption of data, whether it's at rest or in motion, but specifically at rest. Multi-factor authentication, primarily on remote devices and privileged access. And the reason behind that is really driven by the pandemic. As more folks were started working from home, as more folks were working remotely, cloud attacks actually started increasing, something that we didn't think in the industry was really going to happen for quite some time, really started happening in the last 6 months to a year. And so they put these requirements in place before they even would put out a quote. The final item that they're looking for, and we can really talk about it further into the webinar, is a robust incident response plan. You need one, and you need to test for it. Insurers typically require at least once a quarter or once every half year to walk through and do a testing of incident response plans, or CSERPs or SERPs, however you want to say them. So those are really the 3 primary items that a company has to have. And if they don't have it, you will either not get a quote, or the quote for a typical, if let's say a quote would have come out at $25,000, $30,000 for a small business, you'd be looking at a $75,000 to $80,000 policy premium without those 3 items in place. You get into more specificity with applications and what other items cyber protocols and items that you may have in place, but those are the 3 basic ones before a conversation can even really start.
Yeah, I would just add that the attack vectors with your cloud vendors and with your vendors are just increasing. Just this week, Microsoft came out with a blog article and guidance around MSPs, managed service providers, and other cloud vendors that you're doing business with, and basically they're saying that the bad guys, the threat actors, are not only going after you, but they're going after your cloud providers because they're a trusted vendor. And if they can get into the cloud vendor, you trust them and you're not thinking that they're a bad guy from Russia. And so understanding the ecosystem of, it's not just you, but it's everyone that you're spoked with, is really important for risk management. And I know Bhavesh has more to say about this, but when it comes to insurance and the applications and what Boris said, what you need, not only do you need it for insurance purposes and to be able to get a quote and to be able to get coverage, You need it because it's good cyber hygiene and it's good risk management in order to reduce the risk of any type of threat. So multi-factor authentication is the number one thing that you ask after someone has an incident. These are basic cyber hygiene risk management tools that you should have in place, not only for the application for insurance. They want to know that you're doing it so that their risk is lower, but you should be doing it for your company and your company's reduction of risk. I'm sorry, Bhavesh, it's all yours.
Yeah,
I just want to add I want to add for 1 second and to play off of what Lynn is saying. These items aren't necessarily cost prohibitive. I mean, they really are, especially as our cybersecurity firms and services are growing, getting more competitive, and they are actually relatively easy to access and put into place without that much investment from a company. It really is something that everybody should, after this call, if they haven't in place, really look into. Sorry, Bhavesh.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Boris. I was just going to say that. So, thanks for bringing that up. The costs associated with some of these security protocols a couple of years back, let's go even 2-3 years back, for many of the small and mid-sized companies were prohibitive, were restrictive, right? Because again, everybody is trying to do as much as they can with less. You're trying to do more with less. You have to wisely spend your dollars and expend your dollars. But if you see where the trend is going, cybersecurity is no longer about protocols and measures that you have in place because you want to do business with somebody as a contract compliance requirements or insurance coverage or risk mitigation. Cybersecurity has to be part of your business objective. It's a business issue. It has to be part of your strategy as you're looking at it on a regular basis as an organization, because in today's economy, we're all connected systems. We're using different systems. Our data is flowing through our environment. They traverse from our environment to our partners' environments, or frankly, even our employees' environments. In a hybrid world today, where folks are working from home, our workforce is working from home and in the office, organizations have to look at this and say, how am I going to protect not just my assets within the four walls that we have in the office, but the way my organization is extending it to my workforce where they can work from anywhere, right? That then brings these questions around, do I have adequate VPN? Do I require VPN, which is virtual private network, leveraging multi-factor authentication? Do I have adequate endpoint detection tools on the laptops or my assets that my employees are using? So if somebody comes to me today and says, what are the basic protocols I need to have? MFA, absolutely. Encryption at rest or in transmission. Endpoint detection capabilities on your IT asset, because your employees can work from anywhere currently, and their laptops or IT assets have to be equally protected, and you have to have visibility into it, right? Along with that, incident response and retainer services. To Jeff's initial point, there are two types of firms, one that are hacked, one that are going to be hacked. So it's not a matter of if you're going to be hacked, it's when. So you as an organization have to be ready to respond to that, right? Zero-day vulnerabilities that Lynn spoke about. It goes back to the concept of you cannot trust anybody, right? Zero-day vulnerabilities have become that of an issue right now, is because there is inherent trust that we are putting in our software providers, in our cloud service providers, in the tools that we're using. We need to change our mindset and say, I don't trust anything. And if I don't trust anything, what am I doing to protect my assets, my environment, and my data? So the basic protocols that Boris laid out, Lynn spoke about, and I would add on top of it is the endpoint detection and managed detect response, along with incident recovery and retainer services, would be the 5 things to focus on, along with your passwords and access controls, which you do anyways on a regular basis. I mean, that's just good business practices that you have to have in place.
The other thing I would add, and that's perfect, Bhavesh, is we migrated so quickly, all of us, from the office to our homes. And most companies did that without a lot of training for their employees. All of a sudden on March 12th, I was in my home office full time, right? And despite all the great things that we were able to do during the pandemic, like wear slippers every day, we really were using our own equipment, our firm laptop, but we didn't have a lot of time, and our IT folks didn't have a lot of time to help us migrate. So one of the things that I have been talking a lot about lately is the fact that your employees are so important to your data security and to your posture. And employees never want to be the one. When they're the one that brought you down, you know, the person that clicked on that phishing link for Colonial Pipeline is still having nightmares, right? They never want to be the one, and yet one click can take you down. So remember that they don't want to be the one. They're your stewards. They're an important part of your data security. Many people don't know that they should be changing their router passwords at home. Many people don't know that they should be careful about printing at home. They don't understand about vishing, which is when IT calls you saying, hey, I need to help you with our new VPN, and you give them your, you know, username and password. So you have things you can do. You have tools you can that you can implement that cost nothing, and that could be a tip sheet for your employees working from home. Give them the information they need, because we're still seeing many ransomware attacks, malware, VPN, people doing things on Google outside the VPN and going to a watering hole. There are a lot of things that you can do that don't cost money, that you can really reduce your risk, and your employees are a really important part of that. The second thing is to have an incident response plan in place and to test it, and those are called tabletops. Those companies that test their incident response plan know who's on the team, have the team members' name and phone numbers readily accessible in case you can't get onto your computer, and the ability to understand what the process is. They do much better in an incident than those who are just chaotic going, what do we do now?
We definitely
Well
have
said.
covered quite a bit of material, and you know, if you were going to summarize the weakest link in the cybersecurity chain in general, what would you say that weakest link is, Bhavesh?
So as Lynn mentioned, right, your employees are the stewards of your data, and they wear it with pride. But unfortunately, in today's day and age, with the increase in phishing attacks, employees are also the weakest link in the cybersecurity chain, right? Because think about it, they protect the data, they use the data. So if I'm a malicious actor, where am I going? I'm going to go after people who are playing, touching, transmitting, collecting, storing, using data on a regular basis, which are who? My employees. So unfortunately, humans are the weakest link in the entire cybersecurity chain. And that's why it's important for training, continuous training, social engineering so assessments on a regular basis, increasing awareness on a regular basis, touch points with humans on a regular basis, your employees, just so that they understand, the importance and their key role in this entire ecosystem of protection and, at the same time, detection, right? To Lynn's point, we have capabilities and tools in the environment to report a phishing email, not to click on it. Sometimes we have too much going on. Employees are doing too many things. They are stressed out. And it's important for management as a whole to just take a moment and meet with the employees virtually, talk to them, just so that they understand that while they're doing everything they can, that they need to keep an eye out, because everybody in today's connected economy is a target, right? It's just about education, education, education.
And look, education, don't call it training. No one likes training. Training's boring. Training's awful. Training's right. You've got to figure out a way to make it interesting. And what employees like, they like the stories. So it might not be a computer program that they have to go through for an hour and a half, right? No one wants to do that. They're multitasking. We all know how we are, right? So try to figure out something a little more creative for your for your base, whatever makes them excited or engaged, have a contest for a phishing, a phishing scam. Have a contest. Who won? Who didn't win? Give them a Dunkin' Donuts coupon. Whatever it is, don't just do training for training purposes. Make it effective. Use that time wisely. Give them the stories that they can learn from. Look, this is how Colonial Pipeline happened. This is how Target happened. This is how. Take some interesting stories and bring it to their level so they can understand it, instead of talking about, don't click on that link. We all think that we can recognize a link. So do your employees. Make it more engaging and current.
Yeah, and to add on to that, current statistic is about 92% of all cyber breaches are caused by human error. You have any sort of statistic that gets into 92%, I mean, it's very clear, cut and dry what companies should be allocating their resources for when it comes to cyber protections. When a company does find how to make security protocols fun to teach, I think that's the next stock that I'll be buying.
Right,
Lynn's absolutely right.
There are ways to do it, and you've got to try to figure it out. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. No, absolutely, 100%. I couldn't be more on board on that. And then specifically, as far as the human error element is concerned, remote workers is number one for the last year and a half, for obvious reasons, in what's been targeted. You do have more claims, or at least I'm seeing more claims that are going to be arising from IoT devices, specifically with 5G increasing in bandwidth. So that's certainly a new type of risk that insurers and insurance professionals are kind of trying to address and wrap their minds around. Once the majority of folks, most folks may be on here or that are talking about this stuff, whether you're in a major city, you've got the newest iPhone. That's not specifically the case for the rest of America, and as more and more folks are going to be getting faster and more connected phones, and that may not be sophisticated enough to figure out how to best protect their data. The level of security attacks are going to start getting into those rungs of smaller and smaller companies, where right now it doesn't make sense, just because access and time spent versus the payout isn't there. You get a mid-sized consulting company for 150 to 250 grand for locking their data. That's fine right now. In a couple of years, you are going to start seeing $20,000-$25,000 ransomware events from mom and pop shops.
So the other thing, just so everyone understands, IoT means Internet of Things, and your employees have a lot of Internet of Things that are connected to their Wi-Fi, which might be not secure, and they might have an Alexa or an Echo in their office, and it might not have its own password. They might have an IoT device that is their security system, and they might not have a password. All these things are hackable, and all these things can connect if your employee is not using security protocols in their home. The most famous IoT story, just to bring it back to a story, the most famous IoT story was a casino in Las Vegas that had an IoT aquarium, a big aquarium, and it would tell them how the water temperature was, when it needed to be changed, when the fish needed to be fed. And a hacker got into the IoT device, the aquarium, and then was able to navigate or jump from the aquarium to the casino system for a data breach, and was able to have access to the casino's data. So be thinking about that when you're thinking about your employees using all sorts of those smart things in their homes.
Yeah, and it's everywhere. A good segue into the next section here. Are all cyber policies created equal? And if a company currently holds cyber coverage, are they covered for the majority of insurable cyber risk that exists today?
Fantastic question. And one that I think a lot of insurance professionals could spend hours just talking about and boring other folks to death. But the short answer of it is that cyber insurance is still relatively new in the industry. It's only really been around for the last 13, 14 years. It's not like a general liability policy. Insurance started something like 680 years ago in Lloyd's coffee shop in London. And, you've had general liability and property and fire insurance for very long periods of time, to the point where you get a GL policy, it's an ISO form. Almost all of them are the same in the basic coverage, insurable agreements and exclusions that apply, other than a few endorsements here and there, pending on the type of industry and business you're in. Cyber is not like that at all. It's not only is the coverages themselves kind of a Frankenstein's monster, in that you have first party coverage and third party coverage, and all of these new modules that get thrown out there by insurance every year, and connections through property, through crime insurance. There's no two forms that are the same. They started getting similar about 3 years ago. And then we had this explosion in claims and new cyber attacks. So insurers actually had to take a step back, reassess their own business, because some of them were doing very well, like Chubb, and other ones were getting killed and creamed, and they actually had to leave the market. So kind of this formula that started occurring in cyber insurance policies actually reverted back, and you're seeing more differences now than you did 3 or 4 years ago, even though the sophistication of those forms and how they respond is ever increasing. So the short answer is no, they are not the same. There are a lot of coverages that Chubb may provide that Excel or some of these new players that are in the market, like Cowbell or any of the Lloyd syndicates that are out there, don't. Majority of new coverages that are placed through cyber, or kind of experimental coverages, are usually in the new insurance marketplace, like a Cowbell, like Lloyd syndicates, like CFC and E-Risk, whether it's Scottsdale Form or Crum and Foster. But when you go out into the marketplace through your broker or your insurance professional, and they come back and they say, okay, here's one policy that's $1 million limit for these things and $50,000 deductible, and another one that's $1 million and a $25,000. We recommend this one. That has no bearing on how good a policy or a coverage form is. You really have to go and dive deep into the language itself. Have your insurance professional do it. Unfortunately, because of the nature of cyber insurance, that it is still relatively new, brokers haven't been trained that well into it. Their primary focus is selling insurance. That's their job. Doesn't mean that they're bad people. It's just what they do. And their primary focus is not dissecting the verbiage of a cyber insurance policy and being sophisticated enough to explain it in layman's terms to the majority of folks that are trying to, or that are new to buying insurance. So I guess it was a very long-winded way of saying, no, you should take a closer look. You should have cyber and insurance professionals work for you and help you understand what it is you actually buying and what coverage you actually have. Because just thinking that you have cyber insurance coverage because you have a cyber insurance policy is negligent. You don't. There are a lot of things that can be covered that you may not have, things that you assume are covered that you don't have, a whole lot of variable risks in place. And it definitely should be higher on folks' radars than it is now.
I would just add that I do a lot of incident response, and one of the first questions after I get the call is, do you have cyber liability insurance? And I get the yes or the no. And if it's a yes, I find out you know, who's the insurance company? And we've got to put them on notice, and, there's a whole slew of things you do. I will tell you that more times than not, recently, in the last year, I would say that when I get that yes, and then I talk to the broker or I get the insurance policy, many times that company believes that they have coverage for this incident, and it ends up that they don't. So just to really dovetail off of what Boris said, in my experience, and I've been doing this for 20 years, right? It is a challenging place in the insurance market. And even your best broker thinks that they know all the nuances. You really need to use a broker that understands this market, that will sit down with you, that will find out what your risks are. You don't want just, cyber liability insurance. Are you doing wire transfers? And make sure that you are covered for a man-in-the-middle scheme or a fraudulent wire transfer. If you are at risk of phishing, which everybody is, do you have a social engineering rider? Or do you have coverage in the event that one of your employees clicks on a phishing and there's a ransomware attack? Do you have coverage to pay the ransom? There are nuances, and not all policies cover all risks. So take the time, just as you would with your broker around your comprehensive general liability coverage. Are you at risk of flood? Are you at risk of fire? Are you at risk of property damage? Do the same thing with a broker who has experience in cyber liability coverage, to go through the actual risks so that you can have the right policy. Are you a HIPAA covered? Do you have a self-funded health plan? If you have a self-funded health plan, you need to think about having coverage for a HIPAA data breach, an enforcement action. These are the things that you and your broker can talk about, but it's really important that you, as Boris said, that you understand that if someone says, here's a cyber liability policy, it might not cover everything that might happen that you think is cyber related.
Yeah, a new product that just came out recently is, because there is a dovetail. And thank you, Lynn. There's 2 points that I want to kind of bounce off of what you just said. There's a new product that came out recently where they combine crime coverage, traditional crime coverage, which is like theft, employee dishonesty, with cyber insurance, because there is kind of again, that dovetail or overlap in certain risks. Typically, when you buy a crime policy, and they will have an extension, is what they call it, for cyber risk, it is maybe, if you want to put a number on it, like 15 to 20% of what a normal cyber insurance policy is. And I don't know how many times when I've been speaking to a new client or a prospect, and I say, well, what's your cyber insurance looks like? And they hand me a crime policy, which is not a cyber policy. And you have to then have that painful conversation with them, saying this is really not going to cover you. The likelihood that this is going to respond in occurrence of a potential claim is low, very, very low. Notwithstanding the fact that it's not a very sophisticated written coverage extension versus a true standalone cyber policy. The second thing that I wanted to add, Lynn is absolutely right. You don't go to an optometrist for a broken bone. They both can hold degrees, but they aren't necessarily specialists in other fields. And the same thing is absolutely true with brokers. We, as a company, as a consulting firm, advise our clients every time. There are very, very few instances where we believe that one broker fits all. And if your broker is writing your GL and your property and your standard coverages, it is not likely that they're very experienced in cyber. And you should be looking for brokers that this is really what they do, either management liability lines such as D&O, E&O, EPLI, Cyber typically goes into those for those brokers, or really just standalone E&O and cyber coverages. There are brokers that just do that, and they are, every time I've spoken to them, more experienced, more knowledgeable, and have better access points. Any broker can go to Chubb for a cyber insurance policy. Brokers that specialize in cyber are much more successful in getting the proper coverages and additional coverages that you may not get from your standard run-of-the-mill shop broker.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things it all comes back to, and I tell this to all my clients when we do cybersecurity strategy and program design, and they say, oh, what my risk mitigation is, I'm going to just take cybersecurity insurance policy and that should cover it, right? No, it doesn't cover it. So it's not a one size fits all. And everybody in the audience here, the one thing that I will urge you all to think about is, as I said before, cybersecurity is a business issue. So if you treat it as a business issue, when you go out to think about risk mitigation and insurance just being one small piece of your risk mitigation strategy, you need to start thinking about how are the different layers in your business and the activities in your business, the objectives of your business, how can all of that be impacted, and do you have coverage? You're not going to get coverage for every single exposure. That's just not going to happen, right? To Boris's point, insurance industry right now is faced with a challenge with all the exposure and the number of incidents and what they have to go and assess and then eventually pay out dollars from a claims perspective. He's right. They're going back from standardization to each insurance company to its own. We're going to figure out our own risk scale. And based on that risk scale, we'll figure out what premiums work for us and whether we want to approve your claim or not, right? Take the time, understand your business, sit down with a knowledgeable broker, explain to them your business and where your potential weak points are so that you have adequate coverage for those weak points. Just having a firewall in front of your network does not cover you. Yes, it's one point in your prevention detection strategy, right? And it can actually get you some points or marks, but that's not going to give you the coverage that you're looking for if you don't understand where are your weak links in your environment and your business process. So just to bring it in summary, at least from my perspective, understand your business, explain your business with a knowledgeable broker, and understand what can be done. And then you may have to think about how am I going to, wherever my coverage is not enough, what other strategies do I have to mitigate against those exposures?
Amen to that.
There's a lot of material there. It's a good segue. So we've all heard about the SolarWinds compromise and its impact on their clients. What should manufacturing and distribution company do before acquiring these types of systems to ensure that there are adequate security controls in place? And we'll start with you, Bhavesh, on that one.
Yeah, Jeff. It's a great question, and it's actually a dilemma that right now many companies in the M&D industry and frankly across all industries are facing, right? When we go as a business and acquire systems to help us either improve efficiencies or do business right or give us an edge, oftentimes that's all around does this tool or software meet my requirements, business objectives? Is it going to help me either cut down cost, make better profit margins, improve productivity, or help me with a revenue perspective, right? It's always tied to those metrics or those numbers. We don't look at it and say, what's going to happen if this software is compromised, or now that I'm relying so much on the software, the software is not available or the solution is not available. The paradigm shifting. Cybersecurity needs to be one of the pillars when we are evaluating products, solutions, even service providers. Going back to the comment I made before, supply chain risk management, third-party risk management is becoming an increasingly important aspect or domain for all organizations to consider. And products are no different. They're part of the same ecosystem. So to avoid, I shouldn't say to avoid, to be better prepared to be able to respond to an attack like a SolarWinds that potentially can then allow entry doors into your environment because you're using that product, organizations need to go back to their procurement processes and make sure that they're doing their due diligences on the product. They're asking the tough questions. Does the product or the company have secure coding practices as they're developing the product? How often does the application, in this case, the product or the solution, goes to a security test? And honestly, they need to start putting these things in contract clauses, so that there is some recourse for organizations in the event if a product was compromised or there were some zero-day vulnerabilities in the product that led to a compromise in a client's environment. Based on the analysis, there may be some recourse for organizations to go back and say, hey, you told us you did XYZ. Guess what? In the analysis, we found out you're not doing XYZ, or you didn't do them. And because of that, potentially now there's a breach here. So product acquisition lifecycle, system acquisition lifecycle needs to include relevant steps around asking questions and getting some assurances around security and cybersecurity throughout the process. And then once it's implemented, organizations need to go back either in quarterly business reviews with the solution providers or monthly business reviews, have those dialogues to make sure nothing has changed in the product lifecycle, because that can have a negative impact.
Yeah, so to put that in perspective, and to think about it in real life terms, we had an incident, we had multiple incidents where a VPN or a firewall provider, those are pretty critical for the security of your organization, had a zero-day vulnerability, and threat actors got in through either the vulnerability in the firewall or the vulnerability in the VPN. And you have data loss. You have maybe a reportable data breach. Maybe some of your IP got out. Maybe it was, double extorted. And it was because there was a zero-day, there was a flaw in the software that the manufacturer hadn't sent a patch out yet or hadn't told you about the patch. So think about it in that perspective. You now have a problem, right? You've maybe got to get forensics in. You've got an incident. You've got to do your incident response plan. You've got to figure out if there's any personal information. What are my reporting obligations? Are there any European individuals in there I have to notify within 72 hours, and the regulators? You have a problem because you bought this software to help with your security, right? It's your problem because it's your data that's been exfiltrated and compromised. So what do? The first thing you do is get through the incident. And the second thing you do is you look at your contract with that, because that's what's going to happen. You're going to go to that vendor and say, hey, I want you to reimburse me for all of this. And the vendor's going to say, hey, let's look at the contract. Oh, look at the contract. The contract sucks for you, basically, because that's the way it is. If you're just signing the contracts that you get, there are very specific things that go into contracts when you're on the software side, or when you're on, this goes for vendors as well that are providing services. There's no indemnification. There's limitation of liability to the amount you paid per month, or maybe in the last 12 months, none of which will make you whole for the costs that you've expended as a result of this flaw or this vulnerability. On top of that, it might not be that they got into your system. We saw Acelian is a great one. Acelian was, one where that was an encryption vendor. It was an encryption vendor. So you're doing the right thing. You're getting encryption tools. You're encrypting all your high-risk data. And then the bad guys get it and ended up putting it on their shame site. You go back to those vendors and say, I need you to reimburse me for this. And they say, no, go pound sand, because we, as sophisticated businesses, we negotiated this contract, and the contract does not say that I have to reimburse you for anything. In fact, the contract says I don't have to. And if I do, it's $12,000. So here you go. I'll give you your $12,000. So understand that not only should you be evaluating your vendors and your third parties and your software vendors from a security standpoint through security questionnaires and due diligence, But those contracts are really important, and they're really starting to bite people now for all these most recent incidents that are being caused by the supply chain and by vendors. Those contracts, put them on your priority list.
I like that story that that the encryption company got hacked. So who says hackers don't have a sense of irony? From an insurance perspective, there are not all, but there are policies that do offer contingent third-party coverage. What you would have to do as an applicant when you're filling out the application for these covers is, and Lynn's absolutely right, as is Bhavesh. I mean, when something like that happens, that is your problem. In the same way that no fault, I guess a good example or parallel would be like no fault coverage for autos. Something happens, you're in one of those states, your insurance, even if you're not at fault, your insurance covers your car or your vehicle. And the same way that cyber insurance can cover an event, not always, but can cover an event when you have data compromised from a third-party vendor. And as an applicant, you do have to provide significant detail and list out all of the third-party vendors that you use that may have access or data that is in their care, custody, and control, your data that's in their CCC. And when you do that, insurers can agree or specifically exclude certain vendors because they're in the space every day and they know what's going on. If they don't like somebody, or if they feel like that they're not up to snuff in protecting data, they'll certainly exclude them.
So a lot of moving parts, and the most common that we read about in the headlines is ransomware. So two-part question on ransomware. You know, what can companies do to prepare for a ransomware attack? As we kind of alluded to earlier, it's not a function of if, but when, and then should they pay?
So I'll go with the preparation question. What should they do to prepare? Unfortunately, there is never 100% assurance on anything. Somebody tells you, comes to any of the folks in the audience that, you know what, employ us, use our tools, you have 100% assurance that you'll be secure. There is nothing called as 100% security, right? So in order to prepare, I think what comes down to is understanding your business, understanding your IT architecture, understanding whether you're centralized, decentralized, how you provide people access to your most important crown jewels, data. There needs to be an understanding and a strategy drawn out to see how your business operates. Once you do that, you can then devise strategies from a data protection standpoint, system protection standpoint, from a prevention standpoint, and put elements or components in place, whether it is, you know, if I am going to access something remotely because I have a remote workforce, I'm going to make sure that nobody can access my environment without having at least a dual factor or multi-factor authentication. That's my first line of defense. Once they go through my first line of defense, I'm going to have adequate access controls in place. Once they have adequate access controls in place, I'm going to make sure they can only have access to the data at the least privileged level or only what they need to do. In current day scenario, oftentimes we walk into clients and they say we have good access controls in place, but their definition of good access control is pretty much if they have 100 employees, all 100 employees have access to everything in their environment, which makes ransomware, you know, getting into your environment and then encrypting it with ransomware or with a malicious ransomware that much more easier. So have defense in depth, have prevention, protection, detection, response capabilities outlined, tested, and please get independent assessments done on your environment. It's one thing to say I have a security team and I trust them and they get the work done, but you also want an independent assessment done, a verification done, so that you know from an objective third party that yes, everything that you've put in place is working the way it's supposed to work. Because oftentimes, the folks who you have internally who are doing this, they have their hands full too. They have to get through their day-to-day things. They're not only keeping your lights up, they're protecting you on a regular basis, They're also looking for anomalies. They're looking for malicious actors. They may not have the time or the bandwidth to do independent assessments. So you need to think about that as part of your strategy, right? Along with risk mitigation, with insurance, with retainers, with legal relationships, with contract compliance, with adequate security solutions in place, with security operations monitoring. All of those components come together. That's how it works, and that's how security then works well. You cannot just have a tool here, a tool there, a solution here, a solution there. That's not going to make it work if you're not connecting the dots. So again, going back to my favorite dialogue these days is cybersecurity is a business issue. Start from the business and then employ strategies. You may have to tweak them on a regular basis, but that's okay. That means you're doing your job right and things are working.
So I'm just going to add to that a little bit and to because, I'm real practical about all this. So when Bhavesh talks about access controls and escalated privileges, think about your IT system as your office, where you've got hallways and you've got offices. If you can not allow that threat actor when they get into the hallway to not go into every single office so that they're closed and they're locked, you can protect the deployment of ransomware for whatever data is in that office. And if you've encrypted that data in that office, you have a better chance of that data not being accessed when they open up the door. So any way that you can reduce the access will mean that you're going to reduce the risk, right? So if you think about ransomware like that, getting to whether you should pay it or not, if the threat actor gets in and opens all the doors in the office and puts magic dust on it so that you can't have access to it, right? Or locks you out of the office, basically, and you have a robust backup and you can migrate to your backup, that's one thing. What we're seeing right now in Coveware, the last statistic is 80%, and I think that's my experience too. 80% of all ransomware attacks now are double extortion. So what does that mean? That means they get in, and it means that they open up all the doors and they encrypt everything. But before they do that, they use forensic tools to take all the data out and take it back to primarily Russia or China. And they take it all out without you knowing. And then they drop the ransomware bomb and say, pay us $2 million to unencrypt everything. And you go, oh, no worries. We have a backup system. We're going to migrate to our backup system and we're going to be up and running. And you do that. And then all of a sudden you get another communication from the threat actor saying, oh, but by the way, we already have all your data. And we want you to still pay the $2 million. So to pay or not to pay, that was a long introduction, but to pay or not to pay, if they have all your data, it's your employee data, it's your customer data, it's their names, their addresses, their date of birth, their social security number, their driver's license, their credit card, their whatever, right? All their personal information. Well, you have a reportable data breach because it's an unauthorized access, no matter where that person, where those people reside, your employees, your customers. But on top of that, they say, and if you don't, we're going to publish it on our shame website. And this is what's happening every day. I've had more in the last year than I've had. Maze was kind of the first one that hit us all. So what do you do as a company? The FBI says don't pay. Federal government says don't pay. Everybody says don't pay. And oh, by the way, OFAC came out with guidance a year ago. Don't pay. If you pay, you could get fined. In reality, these are the business decisions that you have to make, and it's a business decision. I have all this data that's going to be published so that it's searchable by every person in the world under Google or in all other search engines. The ransomware gangs are now sending press releases out to the press saying, oh, look, we have all of ABC Corporation's data, and here's a link, you can actually look at it. They send it out to researchers. They send out press releases. So here you are as a company, and all your employee data and all your customer data is publicly out there on a shame website that every media outlet has access to, which means basically that you will probably get sued, which means probably that you're contributing to these people's, for sure, identity theft, right? You're in a really bad way with your employees, and you're in a really bad way with your customers. What you do from there is a business decision, and it's a risk decision. There is not a right or wrong. It is a business decision for each business to decide what they're going to do when they are confronted with particularly a double extortion attack.
From an insurance and risk perspective, I think anybody that's on this call and they're listening and they say, I honestly don't give a crap how it's done. I want it to be paid. And this is one of the reasons why, as a firm and as advisors to our clients, we say, if you're gonna do anything, just get some sort of cyber insurance policy. You may not necessarily negotiate it or buy all the bells and whistles, but one of the very few and basic coverages that are in place is privacy liability, cybersecurity liability, and up until about a year ago, ransomware, which has now been severely limited in its actual limit of liability and increased deductibles, but it's still there. The reason why we advise our clients to get any sort of policy, although we typically negotiate very robust ones, is because every insurer has a robust, let's call it, system of providers or infrastructure of providers that can be called upon at a moment's notice in case you do get hacked and a threat actor reaches out to you. So when you do get hacked, if they reach out to you and say, we want 200, 300, 400 grand, whatever it may be, to release your data, and then they do also threaten to release that data if you don't comply, the first thing you do is you call someone, you call your insurance company, who then calls someone like Lynn, and a lot of resources are then deployed in order to solve that problem as best as they can. And I don't think if you're in that position, you really care if the FBI says don't pay. You just want your business back, and you care about your employees, and you care about your customers.
And don't negotiate. Don't negotiate.
Not by yourself. There are professionals that negotiate 100%.
Don't think you can. Don't think you're smart enough to do that.
You're gonna lose.
And don't let your IT folks try to negotiate.
No.
Keep going.
Guys,
Just had to say that.
1000%. You're absolutely right about that. And just to kind of add on to something, I don't think a lot of people realize how exceptionally smart some of these threat actors are. I don't want to give them all the credit in the world, but when they hack you, one of the first things they do is look at your insurance policy. They see how much limits you are covered for, and then they hit you with their demands. If you don't have cyber insurance and they ask you for $5 million, they're not going to get it, and they know it. It's poker 101. It's the same deal.
They look at your financials, like literally. They figure out from.
They know how much you can afford to pay. They do.
So one of the things I tell my clients this, and I'll tell everybody this: all of us know our business well. The attackers know their business well. We all do research and study and do our homework on how we can get better. They do the same thing, right? And they have more resources. Especially if they're backed by state-sponsored or some of the larger organized activities, they have more resources than we as businesses will ever have to expend, because their sole focus is what? To get in once. We're going to spend resources to protect probably hundreds and thousands. All they have to do is get in once. And once they're in, they're creating damage. They're creating havoc, right? So for them, that's their sole focus. So they can expend a lot of resources on that. So as business owners, as organizations, when we are faced with these kind of situations, you can't expect to negotiate the same way you're negotiating business deals. This is a completely different animal here, and you need to take help here with some trained negotiators who know how to negotiate with these perpetrators and have the right skills, tools, and training behind them to do so, right? That's why you call Lynn, you call Boris, you call insurance providers, whoever you have relationship with, you call them first. That way you can get right advice and then you move forward from there.
And what you also, I think, need to understand is this is no longer a guy in his basement, right, trying to get into your system. This is organized crime. And I'll tell you a real quick story. During the negotiation, I don't negotiate, I use a third party, but during the negotiation, the threat actor didn't come back for like 3 days. Like, what the heck? What's going on? Why aren't you coming back and communicating? And the communication was, sorry, I'm super busy. I don't have authority for that. I have to go talk to my manager in perfect English. Sorry, I'm super busy. I have to go get authority to negotiate that. That's what we're dealing with. This is organized crime. This is a criminal enterprise. And you need to understand that just as Bhavesh said, you are not you're not the right one to go down that path, and nor are your IT folks. And I've seen a lot of Boris probably has too. I've seen a lot of IT folks. I love IT folks, but when they try to negotiate, they can make it worse.
1000%.
You all are so amazing, and I learned so much in this past hour. And I know that we've got some folks queuing in on the chat and with some questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Melissa to see if we have any formal questions that are waiting, or if any have come through.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks to all the speakers. No formal questions have come in, with the exception of, I do want to make a note that we are recording the webinar. We will send it out following the program. That said, if people do have questions, please enter them either into the chat or the Q&A. While we're waiting, if I may jump in, if that's okay with everyone, with a quick question. Putting on a company hat, if, after hearing all of this great information, I know I mentioned at the top of the call, there would be a ton of pearls of wisdom. I know I have a couple pages worth at least, and this is just an hour and 15-minute program. What is one action step that you all would provide to a company to either, hopefully not, but start their cyber program, or ideally to bolster their current cyber security program? And I know there's a ton of meat that can be packed into that, but if you have one action step that you could recommend that companies take right after this program, what would that be?
Call us. I think that there was a couple items that we mentioned before, which is in any sort of cyber policy, you do need those 3 items, right? Multi-factor authentication, data encryption, and a robust incident response plan. Aside from that, once you get those items in place and you are ready to either approach the insurance marketplace or approach it for the first time, you do need to have a competitive marketing effort. This is something that we do every day. And that's not only from an insurer standpoint, but from a broker standpoint as well. My mentor always told me, no horse ever set a record running by himself on a track. You need multiple horses in order to get the best possible results and the best possible outcome. This is even more important in today's marketplace, just because of the reduced capacity, reduced insurer willingness to provide coverage, and obviously increased deductibles that are happening, especially from a malware standpoint. So if insurance is one of your key items in either reducing or preventing any sort of attacks, you do need to have a competitive marketing effort to get the best possible outcome. That should be, from a risk standpoint, in my opinion, the #1 item.
So I would say to if I only could say one thing, I mean, I think you have to have a comprehensive data security program, and I'll let Bhavesh talk about that. From my perspective, from a risk reduction standpoint, can I say two things? The first would be, I can't just limit it to one. The two things would be really have an incident response plan in place. It is so chaotic when you're in that situation. You can't even imagine, you can't do business. I mean, it shuts you down. So this is one of the first things I would say as part of your data security program to focus on, because it will happen. And the second thing is really upping your employees' education about their role and how important it is. And so I know Bhavesh is going to talk about this, but the culture is from the top down. Education and making it part of your culture is really an important part. And I'll flip it over to Bhavesh.
Yeah, Lynn, that's perfect. What you just said, you teed it up perfectly. If there's one thing I would say to the audience here, and I'm sure we have multiple folks of different roles and responsibilities in the audience, some IT, some business, own up to security. Security is your responsibility. Each and every one of you on this call, it's your responsibility to make sure that your organizations are secure. It's understand your environment, ask the tough questions, understand what security protocols are in place. Do your own due diligence within the organization. If somebody in your organization has access to things that you know they shouldn't have access, stop, ask that question. So one thing, own security, it's your responsibility. And yes, comprehensive data security program. Go ask your CTO, CIO, CISO that question. Do we have this? And if we don't have this, we need to start.
Yeah, I think sometimes when you're in that C-level position and you may not know a lot about, a lot of the acronyms, for instance, that were thrown around today, or any sort of the specifics of what entails to, institute an MFA protocol. Folks hesitate around that because they don't want to sound stupid. You look a lot dumber when you do get hacked and you're out 400 grand. Be stupid, ask the questions, or don't be afraid to sound stupid, ask the questions, because it will help you in the long run. Bhavesh is absolutely right. Ask the questions.
They always said there's no stupid question, right? So better to ask, get educated, and secure your data and make the organization's controls stronger. Well done.
I think that's a great
100%.
couple notes to end on. So again, I'll express my thanks to Jeff, Bhavesh, Boris, and Lynn. Thank you so much for sharing a piece of your insights. I know this is a very complex subject, but you've helped folks to at least start thinking in the right direction. So again, thank you everyone for joining. And if you do have any questions for the speakers, I'll be sending their contact details out within 24 hours. So thank you again. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
Melissa.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thanks, Melissa.